Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here again for part 2 of my video lecture series on act and rule utilitarianism. So in part 1 of this video series I talked about utilitarianism generally, and then I talked about the difference between act and rule utilitarianism. Concluded the video by talking about the role of moral rules for the act utilitarian and how they're going to say that that the general moral principle that we ought to promote happiness for all is to be is always to be preferred, always to be lived up to in every particular circumstance, even at the expense of violating one of the derived moral rules from that principle. The rule utilitarian, you remember, argues that we shouldn't violate the derived moral rules from the utility principle, from the utilitarian principle, even if in a particular circumstance we would not bring about the best overall consequences, or in this circumstance, given that we're talking about utilitarianism, even if in that particular circumstance we weren't bringing about enough happiness for all. And so the rule utilitarian seems to be saying something counterintuitive here. So it's tempting to say that, or to think, isn't that a violation of utilitarianism? Well, the rule utilitarian is going to say, strictly speaking, no. They're going to say that by following the rules that we derive from the utilitarian principle, we will, in the long run, bring about enough happiness for all. And so what one would have to do in working out such a theory is work out what it means to talk about the happiness being brought about, or enough happiness being brought about for all in the long run. We don't need to work that out for those theorists here. It's just that we, at least here, you get a sense of what that theorist, the rule utilitarian, needs to say. It's also tempting when thinking about rule utilitarianism to think about just cases like we were talking about in the previous video, the case involving divorce, and say, well, isn't the rule utilitarian just going to get the wrong result in many cases? The rule utilitarian is going to say that I should always stay divorced, even in cases where I'm going to be unhappy, and my children are going to be unhappy, and my spouse is going to be unhappy, because there's this emphasis, as Smart would call it, there's this kind of rule worship in place for following the moral rules that we derive from the utilitarian principle. I think the rule utilitarian has a kind of response here. It's not necessarily a perfect one, but the response is just that the moral rules that we derive from the utilitarian principle needn't be so coarsely grained, needn't be so coarse-grained, excuse me. They can be more fine-grained. So they needn't be as simple as one must remain married even when one is unhappy. Maybe they can say something more qualified, like one must remain married in most circumstances, unless it's necessary for the safety of their children and safety of their spouse, or even the safety of oneself. So they can tweak the general the general rule to meet objections, which would have it that the moral rules that they're committed to, that are derived from the utilitarian principle, are just too coarse-grained, by just saying, no, our rules are more fine-grained than that. Now, one potential problem with that might be that every time the act utilitarian comes along and says, look, you've revised the moral rule, so that way you're able to get the same result as my theory. So the rule utilitarian theory is ultimately going to turn out to be equivalent in terms of delivering what we ought to do as the act utilitarian theory. And the act utilitarian says, well, there's something kind of suspicious about that theoretically. I mean, shouldn't your theory be different from my theory? And this is a standard problem that the rule utilitarian is faced with, because you want there to be a difference between the theories. Perhaps the rule utilitarian has some things to say here. So they have some resources available to them to say, well, maybe we get the same results in terms of the rightness of actions, wrongness of actions, as the case may be. But we have to keep in mind that that the rule utilitarian is strictly speaking saying that we need to promote happiness, but we need to do so by following the moral rule, whereas the act utilitarian is saying something different. The act utilitarian, we recall the saying, promote enough happiness for all, even if you're violating a moral rule. Now, whether or not that amounts to a substantive difference is a question that we don't need to take up. I'll let the viewer think about that and arrive at a conclusion of his or her own. Now, I want to think about an argument that J.J.C. Smart develops in the piece that I mentioned in my previous video, in part 1 of this video series, the piece titled Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism, where he thinks he's got an argument that's pretty knocked down against the rule utilitarian. So his defense of act utilitarianism has us think about a case involving a dying friend on a deserted island. And here you're to imagine you yourself. Okay, I'll set up similar to how Smart does, but I'll take some creative license in developing it. But the way I'm going to set it up really captures the spirit of Smart's point. So there you are on a desert island with your friend, and your friend's about to die, and your friend turns to you as he's about to die and says, "Hey, I want you to do with this sizable inheritance I have coming to me is I want you to donate it to my favorite NFL team." Okay, suppose a person's like a diehard like LA Rams fan, and so the friend says, "Please donate my inheritance to the LA Rams." And so you tell your friend, "Yeah, I'll do that. I promise to do that." And then your friend passes away, and you end up going back home. Suppose you end up going back stateside, and you get there, and you're thinking about that. You're thinking about what you should do, what the right thing to do is, and you're working. Let's just say within a utilitarian framework. What's the right thing to do as a utilitarian, and you know your act and rule utilitarian theories, and you're thinking about these things, and you come to the conclusion that the right thing to do is to not keep the promise that you made to your friend, but to donate the money to, say, St. Jude's or some hospital where they're going to do some great work in helping people who are sick and or dying, etc., etc. And so the act utilitarian is someone, as Smart says, who would say that's the right result, because in that circumstance what you would be doing is, all things considered, you'd be bringing about more happiness than you would be if you donated the money to the LA Rams. I mean, the LA Rams may really appreciate the donation, but the Rams are plenty wealthy already. And so it seems like that's the right thing to do, even though, here's the act utilitarian, even though you're going to be violating a very important moral rule. The important moral rule here is what? To keep one's promises. Okay, especially keep one's promises in instances where it's a person's dying wish that you do something for him or her. For some reason, those seem to be more significant than other promises. But still, you get the point. The act utilitarian is saying like, look, this seems to be a slam dunk kind of case that would show that the right thing to do is to violate the moral rule, that we derive from the utility principle or the utilitarian standard um, in the first place. So that's really Smart's argument. It's really an argument by counterexample, or an argument by this case seems really intuitive, so you should believe it. So the rule utilitarian is someone who, in this circumstance, according to Smart, delivers the wrong result. So then we should accept act utilitarianism. Now, of course, the act utilitarian realizes that that's not it's not a slam dunk. You have to hold some variables fixed. I mean, if their case is going to work, we have to keep in mind, or at least keep it fixed, that that the promise that was broken isn't something that gets publicly known, or that the person who breaks a promise, or the person whose promise was defied, aren't high profile enough to cause a lot of public upheaval or public unhappiness. You can imagine the person who is dying, who asks that his inheritance be given to the Rams, be someone who's beloved in society, and if people were to find out publicly that you were donating that money to the LA Rams, or sorry, to the hospital, that this could cause a lot of social unrest and unhappiness. So we have to hold some things fixed. Like Smart would say that in cases where we can be pretty sure that very few people are going to find out that the moral rule is violated, then we are in a position to say that the right thing to do in that case is to not keep the promise to your friend. So some things have to be fixed there in order to make sure that we get the right outcomes, because we need to make sure that there's more happiness on balance, and that it's either the best outcome or it's a good enough outcome for the act utilitarian in question. So in that circumstance, the rule utilitarian, let's just suppose Smart's right, is someone who would say that no, in that circumstance you need to follow the moral rule. Your friend has issued a very solemn promise to you. It's his dying wish, after all. And you may not like the fact that he's asking you to donate the money to the LA Rams, but it's his money. It's his resources. It's his inheritance. And so it looks like, all things being equal, this isn't perfect. The rule utilitarian may come along and say, no, we think that the rules need to be more specific, or as we would say, more fine-grained than Smart's letting on here. But in this circumstance, we could imagine, hypothetically, some rule utilitarian saying, what you should do is keep your promise in this situation, even if doing so in this particular circumstance doesn't bring about the most happiness. And this is because solemn promises are very important, and you don't take them lightly. You start taking them lightly, then there's a slippery slope effect that could occur, whereby it gets easier and easier to allow people to not live up to their promises, to break promises, including the solemn ones. In a world where so many promises aren't followed, the institution of promise keeping becomes very fragile, and that would wreak havoc on our society and cause a lot of unhappiness. Okay, so that really concludes my discussion of utilitarianism and act versus rule utilitarianism. I hope that you have a good sense of what these theories are, and if you have any questions about them, just please write a comment below. Send me an email at jedickin@syr.edu. I'm happy to engage with you and converse with you on these topics. Again, thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great one. Goodbye.